All right. Okay. I think I'm in. So if we make me the person, oh god. Okay. Can people see the ensemble tool? Okay. Now I've hit it or closed it. Okay. So here we are. Um, so I'm gonna start talking microtheories. So every action a character takes is tied to an intent, and uh, every turn a number is generated for each intent, and characters take the action with the highest scoring intent. That's roughly the how decision making is made in SIF ensemble social practices, whatever we're calling what we use. Um, and where do those numbers come from? Well, those numbers come from microtheory rules. So microtheory rules live inside of rule sets. In our example, and should be the data that was used for Ask for Water, we have these following rule sets. You can roughly call each one of these a microtheory. So this is a microtheory of why someone would want to deny somebody. This tab is a microtheory of why someone would want to dismiss somebody, and so on. So and then each row here is a particular microtheory rule. Each microtheory rule you could think of as having a left-hand side and a right-hand side. On the left-hand side is some condition. For example, X did something negative to Y did something neutral to X, and X has more than 50 status individual. So that's the if, or the left-hand side of the rule. And if that's true between X and Y character, then the character's intent or volition to perform actions with the microtheory of that type, in this case dismiss, will be increased. So in this case, increased by 5. So that was any questions up to that point? Okay. Okay, great. So that was just a quick review. It looks like I did that in 2 minutes. Okay. So the idea here is that the set of all microtheory rules essentially make up the underlying culture, the culture, the sociocultural world. And as we discussed last week, the way I think of it is I think of these separate from social practices of what people actually do. And I think that they could be authored almost completely separately. So I suggested that's something that we should start doing, and we could get started perhaps just right after this meeting, is start filling in the microtheory rules. So in prom week, in the terms of artificial intelligence, this is in some case a common sense reasoning problem. So in prom week, we had this generic social world full of kind of high school relevant schema entries like has crush on and cool status and that sort of thing. And what the microtheories need to do is capture all of the common sense knowledge, all of the just basic considerations that pertain to every schema item. And because of that, and because we had so many schema items in prom week, for example, we had like 30-something traits and all sorts of these statuses, and because of that, we had this a combinatorial explosion as we tried to look at what we call left-hand side of these rules, all relevant combinations, and that's how we got thousands of microtheory rules. In our case, we've been more careful about what we include in our schema, and because of that, I don't think we'll end up with 4,000 microtheory rules or anything like that. It'll be more, if it still may end up being a couple hundred or something like that. Okay. So what we want to do is start trying to fill these in. Where do these come from? Well, a lot of it, this is a big authoring challenge because we're encoding the common sense of our culture. We need to decide what we want that culture to be. And there's a very I say not creative approach that I take at the start. So Here's how I'd look at it. There are two main modalities for authoring. One of them is a not very creative process, and it involves enumerating through all combinations of schema items and intents and deciding if you think that that's something you want your culture to care about. This first mode of authoring I consider more about covering your basis. This is a more common sense. The stuff that you might take for granted. For example, if I have high friendship towards somebody, I'll be a little more kind to them. So it's kind of boring rules like that. But you want to make sure you don't miss obvious ones, and that's why I call it the common sense problem, is because it's easy to overlook what some of these things are. Exactly. Yeah, and I'll give very specific example in a minute, and you'll see how you get just a bunch of microtheory rules really quickly doing it that way. Um, so the second modality of authoring is much closer to uh, this culture dimensions, right? This is where you think of the more complicated, specific um, considerations that you want your characters to care about. Now, of course, this is a spectrum because there's also it's easy to overlook things in this second modality of authoring. But this is where you think, okay, I want this U-shaped hierarchy uh, consideration to be very important to these characters. Like, note how that's something that probably wouldn't come out of just looking at individual schema items, but no, that involves multiple schema items kind of put together with ands or conjunction. And so, and these are the more. This is where some the more rich social considerations come in, and usually you might want to give these a higher weights or modify volitions more because these are the considerations. Yeah, when multiple are combined. So the example, the first modality example would be very basic. If I'm friendly towards somebody, I'll be more likely to be nice to them. If I'm friendly with somebody, I'll be less likely to be mean to them. Just these kind of like basic, like, okay, yeah, obviously, right? The second ones are more. I always use the knight in shining armor example in prom week, where it's these more complicated rules. Where say, if I had high romance towards somebody, and then some bully, but someone else was mean to me, and then my crush was mean to the bully, I might interpret those things all together as my crush standing up for me. So it's my knight in shining armor, right? So that's a more potent combination. Yeah, I think that sounds right, and the top up, bottom down does resonate. Yeah, so one, our schema may need to be enhanced in order to support some of these, but we could just pick maybe one of these rows or one of these some of these cultural considerations that are embedded in this document, um, which I don't have right off the top of my head. But if there's some concept, is there one particular that we want to tackle together? It could be if it's a situation. I'm not exactly looking for a situation, but maybe I could help in, fudge it into what I'm talking about. It's more like the motivations that underlie situations. But we can start with a situation. Maybe people are more likely to be less likely to be hospitable to you. Yeah, that was mode one of the authoring. We were jumping into mode two. But I think, yeah, mode one, if you get good coverage in mode one, you have a pretty rich world already, right? That's right. I think I must have misspoke if I said like the mode one definitely does is cultural authoring. yeah. So what you could do is you look at each 2 by 2, you ask, do I want this to be relevant in my world? Do I want deceive and mail or something like that? Just pick 2 random ones to be something relevant, and then, well, yes, I do, and I want it to be relevant in a way that you are less likely to deceive if you're male or something like that. So then, just maybe in a Excel, you put -2. And so if you did that, and there's going to be a bunch of blank ones too, right? It's because not everything influences everything. Yeah, I was planning on. Yep. Yes, but note how those are involve 2 things on the left-hand side of the rule, 2 conditions, which is good. I think you're probably going to want, and it's a little tedious, but look at um, all essentially all combinations of up to 2 things to cover your basis. And by 2, I mean non-intent things. So it's really 3 things. To do it in the kind of spreadsheet way you described, Malcolm, it would be a 3-dimensional uh, things. Like, do I want low age and being offended to affect somebody's intent to dismiss? No. And then move on to the next one. But you know what I would do though is I would probably I recommend only being very systematic about the first one. The where it's like, do I want low trust to affect someone's intent to deceive? Okay. Do I want medium trust to affect someone's intent to deceive? Um, because you'll see, it blows up pretty big once you start considering, do I want low trust and high friendship to affect somebody's intent to deceive? Um, maybe, unfortunately, authoring is a little fuzzy, but I think once you're very systematic about the first one, you can start to be a little looser about having 2 involved, and then a little looser about 3 involved, and it starts to be more if you can just think of an interesting combination rather than actually running into it systematically. I agree. So I think if you look in the cultural dimensions, the privacy, some notion of privacy is in there, and I don't see a way to represent that in our current schema. Okay. Real quick about the collectivist aspect. I'm wondering if collectivism isn't something that this is a question, something that doesn't appear in the schema itself, because the assumption is everybody's collectivistic in the society. So really, collectivism is a notion that falls out of the microtheory rules. So instead there would need to be like a history label if you did something selfish, or if you did something individualistic, if you want to use a different term. And then that way it'd be like, if somebody has been individualistic recently, I'm a little less likely to be helpful to them. And that is a manifestation of the collectivisticness of this culture. That's right. Yeah, it sounds like you guys are getting it. That exactly. I one again. So yeah, absolutely. Yes. So the way I think of it is, you want to be really reluctant to introduce things to the schema, because while it's not a ton of authoring, each one introduces more authoring. So particularly with intents. So if there are intents that you don't care about, the more you can get rid of, then I think intents are really where it blows up. But uh, essentially, you want to be as efficient with, I don't know what the right word is, but as at the end of the day, end up with as many or as few social schema items as you can. And sometimes that'll involve, it's a fuzzy process. It might involve combining things. Sometimes it might involve, you know what, I actually don't care about trustfulness or something like that. It turns out like in that's just not something I really care for my characters to be considering a lot. But I definitely think there are plenty missing. So in this cultural dimensions, it's because collectivism is a huge part of it. We definitely need some way to represent violations of that norm, which would I think be probably a history label. But then once you have that history label, you have the question: well, do we want to have people to have different essentially tendencies to be individualistic? So maybe that might become an attribute as well. But these are the types of questions that come up in shaping your culture. Um, again, I think I got your question, Malcolm. So I would say that while we could introduce into the schema a bunch of like schema and history stuff that is particular to a social practice, and then use it to kind of flag whether or not things have happened or not. That kind of goes against the way that we think about authoring in this paradigm. Instead, it's more like if you think about the practice is what motivation is going to lead me to be convinced or not be convinced in a practice, and it should be built out of something in the social schema. And so the rapport building is modifying something like I don't know, the trust or something like that. And then it is the fact that we trust us a lot that they are convinced. Trust has to be built up through these various rapport building exercises or practices. But I guess I'm just I heard we kind of want to avoid practice specific flags in the social schema is really what I was trying to highlight. Oh, I can do that. Sorry, the directory structure is not quite as friendly as we'd like. Okay. Yeah, so Anne had this complement example. I'm not sure how familiar everyone is, but it's it's a fairly complicated social practice where you can begin with either a sincere or insincere compliment, and there are maybe a couple of ways you can give. Here's an insincere compliment. You can have a backhanded compliment or a flatter, and those are two insincere compliments. And then from there, I wish this was graphically represented. I'm sorry. That'll get fixed soon. You can have a joking response, a romantic response, a negative response, a positive response, a backhanded response, or a humble response. There's a lot of different ways you can respond to having somebody compliment you. Let's go ahead and pick backhanded response. So the action in there is respond backhandedly. And so somebody comes up to you, and you are you are choosing this respond backhandedly because you have the intent to put them down. And so down here you'll see there are two performance boxes, and this is reflecting that there are two possible places that this could have come from. So the idea being that I could be either responding to that the person who initiated the interaction giving a backhanded compliment, or a flatter. Remember, those were the two insincere compliments. And then we have the line that came from that. So this would have been the backhanded compliment. I wish I was confident enough to wear something like that. And then what I'm doing is I'm now writing the dialogue for if I was coming from the backhanded. And that says, thanks, I had no idea wait, I had no idea you had any idea about fashion. Oh, okay. However, if they were flattering me by saying, I wish I was half as talented as you, what's it like to be so good at something? Then I can say, and I'm responding backhandedly, maybe you'll find out someday. But the idea being that as far as the social state is concerned, all I'm doing is manifesting my intent to put them down, right? But the actual line of dialogue that's going to come out can be context specific based on the path that led us to this practice. Yeah, pretty much, yeah. Go ahead, Josh. I'll go to a more complicated example too. And so what this yeah, and so this was built out of we when you guys were doing Ask for Water, right? There was some difficulty in trying to get this dialogue to make sense based on whether or not things had happened in the practice already. But I think this also is a little bit down the line in terms of seeing the value of this. Yeah. Okay, so This is a very shallow practice. This is as deep as it gets, and it's only 3 down. It's only 3 deep. I think for now, maybe because we're out it's yeah, because the deeper this gets, it will have an exponential growth. Um, uh, but we just wanted to show you this because it's just about ready. But I think once we have this we're starting to get the actual dialogue into the tool, then we can really spend more time motivating and explaining this. Do you think? Yeah, great. And then once those schema items are nailed down, I think you guys could start, even if it was in an Excel spreadsheet, start specifying those kind of mode 1. Yeah. Okay. Okay, great. Sure. Talk to you guys later. Bye bye.